I'm joined now by the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd. Welcome, Home Secretary.
Thank you.
Can I start by asking whether you have complete confidence in civil servants, particularly Treasury civil servants, in their impartiality, their integrity and their professionalism?
Yes, I do. I have complete confidence in them. We are envied the world over for the high standards of our civil servants. And I would say now more than ever, we need to make sure we attract the best into our civil service to take on what is an enormous challenge in terms of leaving the EU.
So when Mr Rees-Mogg, for instance, says they're fiddling the figures and others suggest this is propaganda, what's your message to those Conservatives? Well,
I'm very surprised, Jacob, because he is famously courteous, famously thoughtful, articulate. So I'm very surprised that he's used that language. I think that they are wrong. He is wrong here. And this document that he's particularly referring to is not a Treasury document anyway. It's prepared across different departments, and it's a tool. It's a tool for informing those of us who are on the EU subcommittee about the choices that are going to be made. It's not about projecting one way or another. So I think they're wrong.
Can you point to me, on the subject of wrong, to a single government forecast that has been accurate?
I can reassure you that we need to have those forecasts whenever we embark on big policy decisions. The Treasury has them ahead of the budget. We need to have them.
Are they ever right?
Well, they are what they are, Andrew. They're made up of a number... No, not sometimes wrong, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have them.
No, it doesn't.
The UK government has to have forecasts in order to make certain decisions. Sometimes they're wrong, but sometimes they're wrong by degree. They're still right about the direction
still useful.
That it's taking.
OK. So you don't agree with Steve Baker, the Brexit minister, that civil service forecasts are always wrong and wrong for good reasons?
No, I think that Steve Baker has had an interesting week this week when he also, over the whole debate about what was said when, was gracious enough to issue an apology. We all use forecasts. It doesn't mean we put all the weight that people might expect on them. We have to approach them with a certain amount of cynicism, but they help inform the debate and the decisions we make.
Now, it's hard to remember all the time, but civil servants are people too, and they've got feelings, and some of them are watching this programme perhaps. There's a lot of hurt inside the civil service about some of those comments. In fact, they feel they've been dragged into the middle of the political argument. What, again, is your message to those people?
They are valued, they are important to us, we respect their objectivity, and they are internationally admired for the system that we have. And we need to make sure that we continue to attract the best into the civil service.
Now, you say that these forecasts are credible if they're not exactly accurate. And we should remind viewers that in the three options for leaving the EU that they model, British growth drops between 8%, 5% and 2%. In other words, in each case, this is a really significant fact. What did you think when the door was unlocked and you were allowed to read them?
Well, they are tools for helping to inform decision-making as we go into this critical stage for leaving the European Union. They are not forecasts for for certain consequences of the decision-making, because they can't model for the domestic policy that we might take, the adjustments that we would make in order to make changes in the country as we go forward. So, for instance, it doesn't model the changes to industrial policy. It's not going to model the changes to...
The future is unknown,
is what you're saying. The future is unknown,
of course.
exactly.
But you must have been concerned about those numbers.
I'm aware that there are consequences to... If you bring down trade... if you set up trade barriers, there is a consequence to a trading nation. So I am very enthusiastic for making sure that we have as few trade barriers as possible. The Prime Minister has said she wants frictionless trade at the border. That's what we need to achieve. If we put up trade barriers, it won't help our economy.
Do you think when we leave the EU we will grow or we will contract?
Oh, we will absolutely grow. We have continued to grow over the past 2 years, and we will continue to do so. What is important about the strength and the growth of this country...
we will grow less than we would have done had we not left.
It depends on the actions that we take. I mean, the wealth of a country is not made up entirely from trade. It's made up from its culture, its rule of law, its ambition, its enterprise, all these other things which we need to invest in.
I absolutely hear all of that, but let me remind you what Philip Lee, the Justice Minister, said this week. He said, talking about these very same forecasts, we can't just dismiss this and move on. If these figures turn out to be anywhere near right, there will be serious questions over whether a government could legitimately lead a country along a path that the evidence and rational consideration indicate would be damaging.
Well, I would say two things to that. The first is it's not the whole picture. These forecasts are tools for decision-making, but they don't put in place the other elements that we hope to in terms of other trade deals, but also in terms of domestic policy to mitigate it. But the other thing I would say is the decision to leave the European Union was not all about the economy. We know that. It was about sovereignty as well. So, for instance, in my constituency in Hastings, We hate the common fisheries policy. It has not been good for the communities. We would like to make sure that the fishermen all through coastal communities get a better deal. Now, that's not about per capita. It's about communities. It's about independence.
Now, the other thing, of course, about all these models is they conspicuously did not include what the Prime Minister wants, which is this generous, bespoke deal that she keeps talking about.
Yeah.
I described it at the beginning of the programme as being a bit like a unicorn.
Yes.
It's talked about but never actually seen. Have you seen it?
Well, we are having discussions around what we want out of it. The proposals that we saw in terms of the leaked document that we were talking about just sets out consequences of certain choices. In terms of a bespoke deal, she has said what she wants, what we all want, in terms of delivering that deep and special partnership with the EU.
Can I ask you a little bit about that in that case? So what we're talking about is some kind of Canada-like trade deal, but with things attached to it to help us specifically, like a special deal for the city, like a special deal for services generally.
Well, I'm not going to get drawn, I'm afraid, too far into those different sectors. We are having those meetings this week. There's been a lot of criticism about pre-leaking ahead of those decisions themselves. So I'm not going to, and I've been one of the ones who've been most critical of that, I'm not going to go into that. But what I can say is that we're all agreed on wanting to deliver on what we've said, which is frictionless. We want to make sure that the Irish border doesn't go up again, particularly significant having listened to your interview with Jerry Adams, and that we're free to do trade deals outside the European Union. Those three things are what we're aiming for.
When people like you rightly chastise people like me for listening to briefings and leakings and so forth, very often you say, go back and read the Lancaster House speech. It's all there. So I have done. Okay. And I'm going to read you what Theresa May said about the customs union. She said, whether that means we must reach a completely new customs agreement, become an associate member of the customs union in some way, or remain a signatory to some elements of it, I hold no preconceived opinion. I have an open mind on how we do it. Is that still policy?
Well, she has an open mind on it. We published a document last year about saying how we would do it, and we proposed either a customs arrangement or a customs partnership. Those are both alternatives that we could look at.
But the possibility of a customs, because she's talking there about the possibility of a customs union of some kind with the rest of the EU.
Well, I think what she's highlighting there, which we highlighted in the paper we published last year, is that we do not want to have tariffs at the border. So that is a form of customs agreement, arrangement,
To get that, you
partnership.
have to have some kind of customs union.
Well, it is likely to have something within the customs framework, but I don't want to be drawn into this whole A or the customs union.
It sounds like, if I may say so, you are so intimidated by the other side of the argument, you won't actually say the words customs union.
No, I think I've said it rather a lot already so far. And we're not intimidated. I'm not intimidated at all, Andrew. I'm happy to reassure you. We need to make sure that we've given a sense of direction, which we have, about what we want to achieve. But it'd be wrong to think that as we enter these negotiations, we can give all the commas and full stops in the details.
OK, I keep reading things, actually. I'm terribly sorry about this. But Liam Fox, again, it's unmissable. He says it's very difficult to see how being in a customs union is compatible with having an independent trade policy. And Bernard Jenkins, you'll have seen in today's papers as well, making something that sounds quite like a menacing threat if you go too close to a customs union.
So that's why I've said those are the three things we want. We want frictionless trade at the border. We want to make sure there's no border on the island of Ireland. And we want to make sure that we can do trade deals outside of the European Union. That's the deal we're looking for.
That is cake and eating it, however, in the sense that everybody seems to agree that if we are in a customs union, we can't do those great big deals around the rest of the world. But if we're not in a customs union, we have the border problem with Ireland and we have the friction-full trade problem as well.
Well, to be fair, you have brought out all the problems there. We know they're there. That's why we've said that we want to have a bespoke agreement. Now, we're not going to surrender before we've had that battle. We're going to be having those discussions this week in our committee cabinet.
After we've had that, you've had this two-day meeting and so forth, and Michel Barnier is coming over this weekend, negotiations are restarting. By the end of this coming week, will we have a much clearer idea of what the British government actually wants to negotiate?
Well, it depends how... No, well, I take issue with what you say. I think that it's clear what we want to negotiate. We haven't achieved that yet. We've made a lot of progress in protecting EU citizens and setting out the transition agreement, but we need to make sure that we have this wider agreement. I don't know how far that will go over the next few weeks, but I hope that the government will be given the space to try and achieve that. Now,
you mentioned the transition agreement. As Home Secretary, are you absolutely clear that it is a red line that once we have left the EU next March and we're in this transition period, EU citizens won't have the same rights as they have now?
The critical thing for EU citizens during the transition period is that they will be able to come and go to work here. They will need to register in order to show us that they are here during that 2-year period. The Prime Minister has said that she wants them to have different settlement rights to the people who arrived before the specified date.
And that is a red line.
Well, I'm not going to get drawn on red lines because these negotiations are only about to start. But she has said that is what she's seeking in order to make sure that there's a reasonable distinction before the specified date.
Can I put it gently? Because we've heard both Mr Barnier and Mr Verhofstadt said there's no way that we're going to accept that. We're going to fold again, aren't we, on this?
Well, I think that you are being surrendering too quickly here, Andrew.
Yeah, OK, you'll surrender slowly, but you'll still surrender.
No, I think it's right to have a distinction between EU citizens who arrived here before March 2019 and the ones who came afterwards. So I think it's right the Prime Minister's going out to do that. There's a further negotiation to have. I'm not having the negotiation, but I support her in taking that position.
And this being, because she calls it a red line, this means, to be absolutely clear, if the EU won't accept our position on the transitional rights of EU citizens coming here, as we've just been describing, there will not be a transition period.
No, I think our offer to EU citizens, both before and after the transition period, is fair, open and generous, and it takes into account what we want for UK citizens in the EU as well. I hope that they'll see it in those terms.
Essentially, the Brexiteers, or however we describe them, are saying in today's papers again and again, we have the numbers. You people like Amber Rudd and Philip Hammond and possibly even Theresa May are going to have to see things our way or else.
I have a surprise for the Brexiteers, which is the committee that meets in order to help make these decisions, that's meeting, as you rightly say, twice this week, is more united than they think. We meet in the committee, we meet privately for discussions. I think that we will arrive at something which suits us all. There will be choices to be made within that, but we all want the same thing, which is to arrive at a deal that works for the UK, that looks ahead. It's not just about protecting trade behind us, it's about looking ahead to what kind of country we want to be afterwards. We all have those interests at heart, and I think can work closely together to deliver it.
OK, the weirdest suggestion in the papers today, and it is a fairly weird one, is that you might be Boris Johnson's Chancellor of the Exchequer. Could you ever imagine serving under Boris Johnson?
That is such a difficult question on so many different levels. I'm going to pass. OK,
you're allowed to pass. Let's talk about the position of women. 100 years after some women, not all women, got the vote, and Millicent Fawcett and all of that. Now, there's been a lot said about where women are now, and we've had an extraordinary week. We've had yet more Harvey Weinstein allegations from Una Thurman and others today. We've had the President's Club. We've had lots and lots of debates about women going to darts matches, parading around darts matches in the beginning of Formula One. Just give us a sense of where you think the cause is right now.
Well, as you rightly say, it's 100 years since women got the vote, and it is something absolutely to celebrate. The significance is not just getting the vote, but then getting the MPs and then getting women into government. Because only by having women in government do you get women's lives properly considered by government. And we saw that with Harriet Harman, who did so much for women's working lives, and we see it now, I think, from this government, delivering on the gender pay gap, or making sure that action is taken against violence against women and girls.
There's a big cultural change going on. Would you like to see the parading of women at the beginning of boxing matches, for instance, to end as it's going to end with Formula One racing? And
listen, I think it's up to different sporting organisations to make those decisions. But actually, I think the women in sporting events that really inspire me are the women playing in football, the women playing on the field, delivering on the athletics field. And those are the women who I want to inspire, the younger women coming up behind us.
The President's Club event really shocked a lot of people. But up and down the country, on High Street, or not High Street, behind High Streets, there are gentlemen's clubs everywhere, where there's pole dancing and lap dancing, and the same kind of atmosphere pertains. Would you like to see that ended in this country?
Well, I think we are reaching a tipping point now, and the President's Club was objectionable, and I think that women who were working there, particularly, and women working anywhere, should feel safe in their working environment. What worries me most is the women working in the environment, some of the ones you're suggesting there, may not feel safe in that working environment. That's what matters most. And I think that women who are in business, who are working, they expect to be in an environment where, sexual titillation isn't part of the offer. That's what I think has changed.
The Fawcett Society have suggested that misogyny should be made a hate crime. Do you approve of that?
Well, we're not going to move ahead of that at the moment, but I'm always going to look at what the Fawcett Society are suggesting. So, I'll keep a careful eye on their proposals.
Now, there's the Gender Recognition Act coming up as well. Are you as enthusiastic about that as Justine Greening was?
Well, we're going to be consulting on the Gender Recognition Act, seeing how far we need to go with it. I saw today that Women's Aid are going to be reviewing their arrangements for allowing transgender people to work in women's-only spaces. I think this is a very sensitive issue. I want us to consider it very carefully. We will be consulting on seeing what changes we need to make, if any.
What about transgender people going into women's prisons, for instance?
Yes, again, that's something we need to look at very carefully. I want to make sure that transgender women are treated with respect and properly and are always safe. But at the same time, I want to protect women's safe spaces, which is why it's right that Women's Aid are reviewing their own arrangements at the moment. And maybe we can learn from them.
And what would you say to women, including many feminists, who look at what's happened in the Women's Aid situation, for instance, and are alarmed and worried about the possibility of people who are not yet biologically fully women being in charge of those spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I hear them, and I would say, let's look and wait and see what happens with Women's Aid. Let's look at the review that they're having. Let's make sure we don't rush to judgment. But above all, the exception within the Equality Act for only women working in women's safe spaces is not going to be touched.